Okay, I believe we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Intelligent Disclosure. I'm Richard Dolan with my wife, Tracey.
Hi, everyone.
So
we missed you.
We did. We missed all of you. When was the last time we did this live?
I think we did it. We've been skipping a week, so it was probably about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, right. It's been a while.
Right? And not to mention all the craziness going on. It just really, it's a little bit of a time warp, you know? I think we're all going through these really...
Well, for us it is. Like, we're all in lockdown. So we're in lockdown here in New York State. Probably you right now are in lockdown. Most likely. That's just the world right now.
Mm-hmm. So isn't that weird? We're all in lockdown together, no matter where you are.
Right. So for us, though, it's been a retro experience because we've actually gone a little bit offline. Like, I think a lot of folks may not be doing that. A lot of social media, perhaps not really so much for us. And we've had family time. You know, you, me, and my two crazy grown-up kids, and so we're all in the house. We're all doing things together, and it's been kind of, that's the upside. It's actually has been a little bit of an upside for us. So hopefully you're getting some good things out of it as well. It's difficult for everyone. Yeah. Not trying to deny that, but
yeah, we've been going back to basics a little bit, you know, dusting off our bikes and going for a bike ride and things we haven't done in a long time.
Hopefully we won't get arrested in the near future for doing that.
Yeah,
right?
I know. A lot of places are really harsh about it right now. And, you know, done a few other things, but if it sometimes reconnecting feels good. So
totally agree.
We've been doing a little bit of that.
Totally agree.
And yeah.
So the last time we did this, I think we did a whole thing on the coronavirus, the pandemic. We're not going to do that now.
No.
So we're back to our basics, And, you know, before all this craziness started, we were on a kind of investigation, I think to some extent anyway, of UFO crash retrievals. And we want to continue that. So I think, you know, we were discussing this a few days ago. What do we want to work on? And I think we both agreed. Mm-hmm. I was on a Leonard Stringfield focus. I really wanted to do some Stringfield, and we have a little bit of Stringfield tonight, but we settled on.
Yeah, we'll have more of that in the future.
Yeah, we settled on Aztec, New Mexico.
Yeah. I just think it's so important to look at some of these crashes. And one of the important things about Aztec, at least for me going back through it, is that it seems to be one of the best documented cases out there.
Now it is.
Right.
Now it is.
It's one of the most controversial as well.
Yes, absolutely.
It had so many witnesses. It has so much detail. It's been looked at by so many different researchers.
Yes.
On a very serious level.
I'll get into some of that
it's been
shortly.
Debunked and rebunked, and
that's right.
And it's back in circulation. But I believe it sounds like there's no other case that has this much documentation.
Well, Roswell.
Well, as far as all the people who, I mean, you tell me, I don't know, because I haven't looked into Roswell as deeply as you have. But it sounds like this one has so much good evidence now that the Ramseys have been into it as well.
Yeah, so that's Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, and they really are the key investigators, along with Frank Thayer, who's one of their co-authors. I only have the first edition of this excellent book. They've got a second edition out there. And Frank Warren was also listed as a co-author with them. But really, this started out initially as Scott Ramsey's obsession, then Suzanne early on became his partner. And they've spent, I think I was reading in Suzanne's introduction or someone's notes, they spent over $500,000 over the years in investigating this. Unbelievable. And just countless hours going through countless thousands of documents.
Yeah, over 55,000 documents or something like that. Yeah. And
interviewing some of the last surviving firsthand witnesses. Yeah. So we'll get into some of that. And look, we're doing this tonight's show. We're doing 45 minutes. So you got to understand we cannot do all of Aztec. What I would like to do, I'd like to get Scott and Suzanne, if we can get both of them and do an interview. We can, maybe the four of us, we could just do an extended Richard Dolan show, and the four of us can interview them and have them really hash this out.
I think that'd be amazing. I think it would actually end up being at least a two-parter because there's so many areas to go through.
I agree.
And their research was so incredibly thorough. And I think when all of you, I mean, some people are like, this was old. It happened a long time ago. But I'm telling you, when you get going on it, I mean, I didn't even want to do the show tonight because I wanted to go even deeper because you keep finding these different rabbit holes of things
True.
that you get curious about and you want to know the answer. Were they able to interview this witness? Were they able to find this? Were they, and they did exhaustive research, and it's so fascinating. So if you end up getting engaged just from hearing this little bit, stay tuned because we would definitely like to interview them and
Right.
hear about it firsthand. 'Cause
Yeah.
they themselves did some of the firsthand interviews. So
Yes, absolutely. But they weren't the first. And this is an event that has a little bit of a history.
it does. So the historian, hopefully you can fill us in on some of the background because I think until you break through to a certain level, it is a little bit confusing because there were so many researchers who had their hands in this.
Yeah, there's two elements when you get into the Aztec case. So one is the actual what happened, like what happened, then what happened, then what happened, then what happened. And you have to know that, obviously, but that has taken time to get to this. The other important story about Aztec is how it first came out into the public eye, how it was debunked and really debunked in a very underhanded way, it turns out. And then the slow story of how subsequent researchers, even long before the Ramseys got involved, began to investigate this case and find, not bring life, but like find that this was not a dead case. They found, oh no, this is actually one heck of an interesting case. So it's helpful. We should go into that a little bit. Can I describe that?
Yeah, please.
So can you get my Scully books? They're right over. I got both of them, the paperback and the hardcover.
There we go.
So I've shown this on before. This is a hardcover. I don't have the cover jacket to this. This is Frank Scully's original Behind the Flying Saucers from 1950. Here's the paperback version. I've shown this before. Just check that out. That's like classic 1950s alien invasion cover. But it was a journalist writer named Frank Scully who really made the initial case for this. And actually, he wrote about this in a series of articles back in 1949, late 1949, for a magazine called Variety, and then later took those and got them in his book. And Scully was always of the attitude that, forget Donald Kehoe, I was the first, and he was actually the first to write in a serious way about this phenomenon. So he writes this book, and what does he really say in this book? Well, he has the basics, essentially, that we ended up with many, many years later, which is that the United States Air Force recovered a flying saucer and had a crew of 16 alien beings. Now, Scully got this story through a connection named Silas Newton, who was an oil man, I think a millionaire, and another connection of Newton's named Leo Gebauer, who was not, it was basically Newton was the public connection that Scully always talked about. And what Scully talked about was that Newton introduced him to a Dr. G, that's G-E-E, as he wrote it out. And several other, he said, government scientists and all that who'd been sent to New Mexico to examine a crashed disc. And actually, in Scully's telling of it, was actually multiple, not one, multiple crash retrievals.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a part when you're going into the case that is confusing right off the bat.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm glad you're talking about that a little bit.
And it's interesting because, the fact is that researchers years later, like Leonard Stringfield and others, Ryan Wood and Bob Wood, have also said, there actually appear to have been a number of crash retrievals of UFOs in the late 40s, not just Roswell, not just Aztec, but other likely ones as well. That's not a corona cough, just saying.
It's not. I'm good. What is it with this show sometimes?
Remember last year?
I didn't cough all day. I know.
Yeah. So just to continue with Scully's story
Yeah.
here, because it's kind of interesting. And as he puts it in this book, the scientists were accompanied by the military. They were sent to a very high rocky plateau east of Aztec, New Mexico. Turns out, like, Hart Canyon is northeast of Aztec, New Mexico, and that is really where the Ramseys absolutely determined this happened. But anyway, so the scientists are studying this craft for several days. It's 100 feet in diameter, according to the information Scully got. And, they're hanging around for a few days beforehand with Geiger counters and other instruments to make sure it's safe. They eventually go there, and they notice it's a beautiful disc-shaped craft. There's like a dome on top, right?
Dome on top, dome on the bottom.
Right.
The dome on top was actually a little bit larger than the bottom dome.
Right. Now, are you going off of
yes,
Ramseys,
I'm going off Ramseys purely. So this is interesting to hear the differences.
So this is consistent, though.
Okay.
So that's the interesting thing. And so what they notice in Scully's version, this is back in 1950, he's writing this, 1949, that there was a broken porthole. So there was one visible piece of damage to this craft.
Right.
So this comes right from the beginning, from Scully's source. And that allowed them to look inside. And they discovered 16 bodies. Now, in the way the Ramseys have it, it's much more nuanced, but we can get to that.
Yeah, we'll tell that story. It's
the beings in Scully's tale are 3 to 3.5 feet tall. I think they're a little taller in the Ramseys version, but they're still very short. But here's a consistency, which you get throughout, which is that their skin looked very dark, like it was charred or burned.
And brownish.
Yeah, exactly. And they also talked about seeing, as they called it, whether pamphlets or books. I'm not really sure, but it was with a writing that was indecipherable.
Yes.
They couldn't understand the writing.
I'd heard something like that there was this physical book, and it was not laminated, but there just was odd that there was this physical book in there.
Right. Now that's you're getting at the Ramseys.
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. So we're seeing, though, because we didn't review the Scully version of it before we went on.
And
So
we don't usually review this together beforehand. So it's interesting to us as well, what we both were digging into.
I know, right?
So,
it's crazy. You think we should. One other thing that reminds one of Roswell in how Scully was reporting this is that they described material. Now, I'm not sure which materials we're talking about, but very strong, very lightweight materials. So you get that with Roswell.
Which materials?
Well, I think they were talking about at one point the hull of the ship.
Oh, okay.
But I think they had to have been talking about some other materials, but
okay, I don't know.
Be that as it may. And then you got descriptions of the beings. I mentioned they were very short, but they were also wearing these matching types of clothing, like a dark blue, tight-fitting, form-fitting sort of a garment. Absolutely.
I mean the Ramseys.
Absolutely, and it's all throughout because there's in-between researches, which we'll get into. And then again, according to Scully, they were taken out and brought to a research lab, unnamed, where they were, I think, autopsy, dissected, and preserved or whatever. So basically, the biggest variation that I was seeing, like with Scully's version, is that these beings, they were short, but they looked basically human.
Right.
Maybe with slightly larger heads, but like it's not noticeable. They were just like small people. Now, that's not quite this case when you get into later tellings of it. No, and the other thing, I just want to finish up here with Scully, was that he said he had two main sources, he said, although I think in reality he had more than this, that they allowed him to actually inspect part of the craft as something that looked like a radio, but it was very small. And he said you could fit it inside a cigarette pack. So it was very little. And it didn't have any like tubes, which vacuum tubes were, of course, the thing back in those days. He said there were gears that had they had no play, he said, no lubrication. And the radio, there was no wires to this. It had one dial and that was it. So it wasn't really a radio. It was like some means of communication.
Right.
And so he said that they showed this to him. That's Frank Scully saying this. Anyway, so Scully's book comes out with the crazy cover and all of that. And along comes a guy named J.P. Kahn.
I'm just writing down a couple things to bring up after.
Yeah. Okay.
You'll see why. I just don't want to forget. So,
no, that's good. So J.P. Kahn is a writer. He knew Scully. And the thing about Kahn is in the late 40s, he was very interested in the whole thing about flying saucers. And by the way, the Ramseys do the absolute ultimate expose on J.P. Kahn. So everything that I'm saying here is really from the research of Scott and Suzanne Ramsey. You really should read it in their book. And again, I'm really wanting us to interview them. But anyways, Kahn is interested in flying saucers. He's like, in his opinion, this is like the most important thing of our time, talking late 1940s. So he's into it.
Yes, Kahn. Yes,
right.
Go on. This is interesting. This is so interesting.
C-A-H-N is the spelling. Yeah. So, so Kahn wants to go in with Scully on this book, on this writing project. Mm-hmm. And he's really into it. Scully's like, nope, not interested. I've got this covered. Thanks a lot. Don't really want to work with you. Apparently, Kahn offered a lot of money to Scully. What Kahn said actually was $25,000 to get the ownership of the story. Now, in 1949, 1950, I mean, that's nice now, right? Nice, wouldn't want that. But like back then, it was an enormous amount of money. And Scully doesn't go for it. So Kahn, in the Ramseys analysis, and I have to just say in this book, and again, I'm only showing the first edition. I really need to get the current one, but they actually spend, in some ways, the most compelling element of this book to me was their devastating analysis of J.P. Kahn. They really did an expose on this guy and showed, I think beyond any reasonable doubt or suspicion, that this guy was out to get Scully, out to destroy Scully and to destroy the story. And we'll let them tell it because I really want them on here. But he does go after Silas Newton, who is Scully's main guy. And like, a lot of oil men, like they're trying to get investors. They're trying to get people to invest in their rig. And apparently Newton and Gebauer, who he was working with, Gebauer was a smart guy and he apparently was tinkering with things. And they had a device that they believed, or they were saying, could help them find oil fields like effectively. And so now, and they weren't saying that this was alien technology. They were actually saying, well, we got this from some scientists during World War II, which was just recent. So here's Kahn, and he's got the FBI. He actually called the FBI on Newton and goes to one of Newton's investors. Like, this is like pre-Philip Klass. This is the kind of stuff Philip J. Klass would do. Right. And talk to the witness, not the witness, the investor, and say, hey, I just want you to know, you think that you're going to get your investment back from Newton. Well, don't count on it. This guy's a con man. He's going to bilk you out of all your money. And he got this guy so worked up. They're like, yeah, we have to call the FBI. And so the FBI gets involved, and they do arrest Newton and Gebauer on these charges. And in the Ramseys book, like, they describe this a lot. And a lot of the records on Newton and Gebauer are not available to this day. It's been 70 years. Yeah. Just about.
And there's more to that story as well.
Right.
Ways that they just went about discrediting them.
The thing is,
as far as the materials they were using to locate oil.
Yes, exactly.
Being tested and turning out to be fake, and this kind of thing.
So the thing is,
we don't know if that's true.
I don't know all of the details here either. I'm not sure if anyone really will, but what's very evident is that Kahn was grasping at any kind of straw he could, got something that he could use to smear Newton, and thereby, and then once Newton and Gebauer got arrested, no matter what the result is, he was able to basically destroy their reputation. And that was the end. And so from that point, and then J.P. Kahn writes this very major article in True magazine, which was a big publication at the time. It was like Life magazine. It was very big. And so that was it. Like, that basically, that was 1952, and that completely took down Scully's book and the reputation. And it's the whole
So
idea.
the whole thing kind of crumbled from there
Fell apart.
as far as being a legitimate
Absolutely.
telling account of this crash retrieval.
That's right. And so so when you get UFO, and this is the very early period of anyone really looking into the so-called flying saucers, UFOs. 1952 is early. There was no nightcap. There was no, APRO was just like basically Jim and Cora Lorenzen in their kitchen. And so there was really not a lot happening in terms of civilians. There was no real ufology. And by the time that got going, people looked back on that hoax case and said, oh, crash retrievals, a lot of nonsense.
Right.
And that was shown to be a hoax. And this was...
Yeah, it seems like once something, hoax goes out as the label, it really sticks. And so...
Yes, that's right.
Right? And you have to work really hard to regain that reputation. So,
and this,
which is what happened with this case.
So, fast forward 20 plus years, and you get Leonard Stringfield, who, we've talked about him before, so there's no need to go into the detail, but in the late 70s, he's starting to get a lot of people coming to him after he wrote a book that mentioned Ray Fowler and the Kingman UFO crash.
Yeah, I want to bring that up after.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Stringfield gets all these people, and suddenly he's communicating with everyone. And one guy that he's in communication with was a retired professor named Robert Carr, C-A-R-R. I happen to have an old friend by the name of Robert Carr. Does good plumbing work. But this is a different Robert Carr who
See,
was...
this is all the background that's so interesting, but so, it can be hard to navigate it. Robert
Carr is a fascinating guy in all of this. And you see he's a tie-in to from the old to the new. And no one really talks about this guy, but
okay.
Stringfield communicated with him. He had taught at South Florida University, not far from where you used to live.
I went to the University of South Florida.
You did indeed.
St.
So
Petersburg.
I don't know which one he went to, but in any case,
there's two. So.
He taught mass communications for many years. Okay, I think we're back.
Well, let's just.
I believe,
are we in the same?
Nope. I think we're back. I'm gonna check this and make sure that our mics are working.
What?
And are we good to go? I think we are.
Back.
Look, guys, have no idea how and why this happened. Hopefully, in our post-production, we may get one of our YouTube experts to slice out that little glitch in the middle.
Yeah.
Pursuing X, are you hearing us?
A little glitch in the matrix there. I don't know what happened, but we're back. We're back with you guys.
Don't know why. So
crazy. Where were we? Carr.
Talking about Robert Carr. So this is an associate of Stringfield's who taught at South Florida mass communications. He was, according to Stringfield, Stringfield knew him back in the 50s. They were colleagues back then for UFOs. And they reconnect, and Carr has spent the last, I think, 17 years researching the Aztec case. And Stringfield, like all the UFO people back then thought, that was a hoax. But he's talking with Carr. You going to say something here, or?
No, I'm just going to say that's what seems to happen. As soon as people get interested in this case, it's this rabbit hole that you just can't leave.
No, exactly.
It is incredible.
So with Carr, actually, there's one statement here that I want to read by Carr. He's writing to Stringfield. He just says, I've spent 17 years collecting the data I have on the Aztec case. He's writing this in 1978.
Okay.
So 17, so since 1961, is that right? Yeah. So all through the 60s and 70s. He says, I know of other retrievals, but my main thrust through all these years was concentrating on sources who knew about the Aztec event or incident. He says, I could write a book about that one retrieval alone. Of course, he didn't, but he did talk to Stringfield about it. And what Carr was saying, he ended up getting 5 direct witnesses. So he actually really got deep into this as well.
Right.
And, he didn't know about Roswell. No one knew about Roswell. Even like in 1978, that was when Stanton Friedman met Jesse Marcel.
Yeah, we all take it for granted because it became this huge thing. But back then it was gone in a day, right? Just gone.
Roswell for one day was in the news, and that was it. So it was pretty much forgotten. It was in 1978 just about to be resurrected, but it wasn't really prominent in the minds of research. For crash retrievals, the Aztec case was actually way better known. It just had been dismissed as a hoax. That was the thing. Mm-hmm. The Kingman case that Ray Fowler brought out, that was actually better known at the time than the Roswell case. It's really kind of crazy how these things happen. But anyway, Carr tells Stringfield that it was 12 occupants, not 16. That was his variation. And he said it was about 12 miles west of Aztec. So most of the research, actually the other research, has it east of Aztec. So Carr was getting a little bit different information. But one thing he said that you get with later events, later editions of this or versions, is that there were 3 separate radar stations that tracked this object.
Right.
And they were able to triangulate. So one was at what later became Edwards Air Force Base, and then there were 2 others, and they were able to triangulate it, and they pretty much pinned it to this location near Aztec, and the Air Force rushes crews in from this Muroc Air Base, later Edwards Air Force Base, very important base in Eastern California. And again, all the similarities with Scully. The craft was found undamaged except for one puncture, which probably killed the occupants. They were rushed to Muroc Air Force Base in this version and refrigerated and then sent to Wright-Patterson for autopsies and preservation.
Always Wright-Patterson.
Yeah. And so the witnesses that Carr had, one was dead at the time that he's writing to Stringfield, and she was a surgical nurse who assisted in at least one of the autopsies. So that's a pretty direct witness. And then another was a very high-ranking Air Force officer who was at Wright-Pat. He had a lot of other background on this guy. And then 2 others who were aeronautical engineers, and they gave a lot of information on the structure and the systems of the craft.
This would have really got Stringfield's interest because that was a main thing for him. He always wanted firsthand witnesses. I mean, everybody does, of course. Absolutely. But that was a big deal for him.
Well, it really turned him around on Aztec as well. Like, with Stringfield's writing, he said, look, I used to consider this a hoax, but absolutely not anymore. We need really deeper investigation of this. And Carr's last witness was an enlisted man who just Air Force, who was a guard on duty at an air base that he didn't disclose which it was. But anyway, a lot of witnesses.
Did you happen to get in Carr's account whether they refer to scientists looking in on the dome or whether it was
I don't recall.
Oil workers?
I don't recall offhand.
Okay. Just curious because that is a discrepancy, right? Between
it's a little bit of a different, and you get that especially with William Steinman's account, who we'll get up to in just a minute. But anyway, the descriptions of the bodies were very similar, basically charred, very dark. In Carr's research, they had somewhat larger heads. So they weren't totally like little people. They were little people with larger heads and maybe even a little elongated. And the eyes were slanted, giving the appearance of like Chinese or East Asian, not alien necessarily. So they weren't like grays with big black eyes.
Yeah, I noticed that people don't really use that word.
Which word?
Alien.
No, in the early years, they really didn't. It was humanoid or occupants. A lot of these early UFO researchers, were actually very, very meticulous in how they described this. They didn't just jump into alien. They said they were very descriptive, like a police officer would be. You describe, they were humanoid.
However, I just want to say humanoid kind of means different things to different people. In this case, humanoid was sort of human-like. They meant human. I mean, it sounds like they were taking that as almost human features.
Well, compared with other animals on Earth, they would look more, whereas, 2 arms, 2 legs, head.
But I think for some people, humanoid means more gray-like. They're just bipedal and they could still be gray.
Or more alien. Yeah, well.
So I think I prefer when they classify it a little bit. You don't have to use that word, but I'm just pointing it out.
You prefer what word?
Well, it's just kind of interesting to go beyond the word humanoid. Like humanoid sort of is, to me, is kind of like a broad classification. Then you need to classify it even more.
Well, I'm saying the earlier researchers were just careful.
Yeah. Well, although
they're being cautious.
They really like to use the word flying saucer, which was interesting too, right? Well, but that's how it appeared, though. Oftentimes it was a disc that looked saucer shaped.
I think it's totally legit use of the phrase, frankly. So anyway, that's Carr. Oh, the other thing about Carr, he described the clothing very consistently to how Scully had and how other versions all are consistent. Dark blue, form, tight. Yeah.
Tight fitting, no insignia.
All of that.
Right.
So that's Carr. And then could you get Steinman's Big Fat Book under there?
Yes.
This is, so then a few more years, not many years go by. This is William Steinman, actually Wendell Stevens is listed as a co-author. I think this is basically Steinman's gig. This looks bigger than it is. I mean, the typing is it's kind of like old-fashioned typewriter in here. But there's a lot in this. Make no mistake.
Those are some pictures of the Mesa. Or
right.
No.
So up until the time of the Ramseys, that's one that came to Stringfield, actually. These here.
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, we can show these guys. So this is one of the drawings in Steinman's book.
You've probably seen us show this
alien
one before.
Hand.
Yeah.
There we go. That's it.
Yeah.
That actually came to Leonard Stringfield. It was, I think, done by a doctor that Stringfield worked with. In any case, if you would probably move that away from the mic for the turning of the pages, just a helpful.
It's fun to look at.
But so William Steinman, who I'm pretty sure is still around, I was lucky to speak to him about a decade ago. I really liked him a lot. He was a great researcher who for, I think about 5-6 years was very active in the UFO field, not just doing the Aztec case, but lots more. But on Aztec, he, I don't know if he was the first one to come down to the exact date of the crash, which he put down as March 25th, 1948. And that's the date that we've had ever since. He also mentions, along with Carr, that there were 3 separate radar stations that tracked this object from different locations. Now, in Steinman's account, and possibly with Carr's, but I don't know that this was the case with him. But with Steinman, the people on the scene were highest of the high level. So the power scientists like Vannevar Bush, and if you're into the UFO field, you probably know that name. And by the way, he wasn't related to the famous Bush family, but he was a powerful man, the number one, you could say, power scientist of his generation. He was a great scientist, but he was also a great organizer. And so he was on top of this, and he sends people like John von Neumann, the most brilliant mathematician of the 20th century by far, absolute genius, sends Robert Oppenheimer, sends Jerome Hunsiker, sends Lloyd Berkner, and Detlev Brunk, who does all the autopsies. A lot of these names are listed in the MJ12 documents as well. And this is in Steinman's research. So now I'm going to share this screen. Let's see here. This is just off Google Map here. And I didn't really list this very well. So Hart Canyon, this is where Scott Ramsey really nails it. We're talking northwest New Mexico, really close to the Colorado border, which is here. You've got Arizona and you've got Utah here. And I'll just show the a little more of a close-up. And so here's Hart. You can see the terrain too. This is there's no cities here, guys. Here's a little town of Aztec, and there's a little town of Farmington, New Mexico. And this is it. This is what you got going on here. It's a lot of scrubland. It's beautiful, but it's not, there's not a lot of people there. So let me just see what my next slide is going to be. All right, we'll come up to that in a minute. I've got a couple of drawings from Michael Strat and an artist he worked with, Tom Bogan. Michael and I actually showed these when I interviewed him
for the Richard Dolan show
about a year ago. Yeah, and we watermarked those. You'll get to see them in a minute. But so the point is, Steinman does a much more thorough retelling of the Aztec story. But then we come to Scott Ramsey. And Scott Ramsey really gets a lot of these original witnesses who were just still alive. And so we should just move on to that. Do you want me to talk about some of these images, or do we want to go through what actually we think happened?
Yeah, definitely.
We both had some notes down here. So, by the way, I did a nice interview, that one with Michael Strat from, I think it was last August.
It was last year. But you guys really did a very quick overview of what was happening without a lot of the background that you just described right there, which I think is super
right. And we talked about other cases in that interview as well, not just Aztec, but
you talked about Kingman, and Kingman is actually really important, I think, because
what do you want to say there?
Well, when you were describing this main discrepancy, which we're going to get into, of the
will we be done in 8 minutes, because we're supposed to do 45 minutes?
Oh, we're just getting into it. No way.
No, we'll take it for an hour. What do you think?
Yeah.
Right, good.
So yeah, that biggest discrepancy of it being scientists who found the ship and were looking into the ship,
right,
versus
now when Scott Ramsey's research, oil riggers, they were the first on the scene.
Yeah. Well,
and then the military.
Well, after we tell the story, let's talk about Kingman briefly, because it almost sounds Kingman was all about the scientists going to visit the site.
Well, that's 5 years later.
I know, but it sounds more like they were referring to Kingman when they were talking about the scientists. I know there's a time discrepancy, but there's a few things that really sound like Kingman.
That's interesting. Well, when Carr was doing this investigation in the 60s, the Kingman crash was not known. Until the early 70s. So it's possible, but it's also likely that scientists were brought to the Aztec site. You would expect that. But you would also expect that the protocols would not necessarily be nailed down to the extent that they were later for the Kingman crash, So, you'd expect them to be brought there.
Yeah.
But it seems it was a little more haphazard, because with Scott, now let's just talk about some of the things that he has very consistent with the previous tellings of the story, right? The size of the craft is, I think it's like 99.9 feet.
It is.
In diameter. So it's
let's tell
exactly
the story, and then we'll get into the craft description.
Okay, well, so it comes down a little more than 10 miles northeast of the town of Aztec in a place known as Hart Canyon.
Right, and this happened 8 months following Roswell, right?
Yeah,
8 months later.
We're talking March of 1948, March 25th.
It happened in the pre-dawn hours, So this was before 5 a.m. in the morning.
Okay, right.
Yeah. It started out with 2 policemen actually seeing this craft, this flying saucer.
Mhm.
And apparently they had seen flying saucers before. So it, it wasn't that big of a deal, but they wanted to follow it, of course, and see where it was going. And they noticed that it was kind of wobbling.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that's where it starts. And then you have a rancher who was going out in this early morning to feed his goats.
Mhm.
And he reports seeing this flying saucer as well going over his property, this illuminated disc going over his property, and then hitting a cliff and sparks flying, but it still kept going. So he actually doesn't have a phone. He goes to a store.
Yeah, no one had phones out there in
phones,
1948.
right? This is interesting because the military end up showing up.
Mhm.
But this is how they got alerted, because that rancher went to the store and called Kirtland. Is it Kirtland? No.
Yes.
Yes. And
That's the town of Kirtland.
the Air Force Base.
Kirtland.
I have
Yes,
so
I
many
think so,
notes
right.
here. I don't know
Right.
where to put it.
Keep going.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was. That is
Mhm.
where he called the Air Force
Right.
Base. Okay, so then you have the story of the oil field workers. There were 4. They get a call from their supervisor who says he thinks there's a fire on top, or he thinks there's a fire at the Heartland. Is it the Heartland Mesa? The Hart Canyon
Yeah.
Mesa, right?
Mhm.
So the oil workers go to check it out because they have there's an oil what's it called, like an oil outfit there at that canyon, at that mesa.
Can I
So-
show a couple of pictures while you're
Sure,
doing this?
yeah.
Actually, I just want to jump in. So we have Michael Strat's. This is Michael's drawing. We showed this on this program almost a year ago. I just put in the Michael didn't watermark it. I did that for him just to show. That's his drawing. He's really great at this, and you can see this is 100 feet wide. And then I'll show you the oil worker. Oh, this is a drawing.
Okay, well, I was just going to keep telling the story.
Oh, well,
So
okay. Well, there's. Yeah.
well,
I shouldn't do
basically,
that,
these
yeah.
guys go to basically these guys go to check it out, right? So
Right.
they travel over there,
Right.
and when they get there, they don't see a fire, and they check out the oil rigging, and everything is fine, but they do see smoldering at the top of the mesa. So they head up there to check it out, and this is what they find. They find this craft. It's on a very slight tilt,
Yeah, I'll
and
try to show
the
this picture.
pictures, that Michael Strat has are just amazing.
So this is actually done by Tom Bogan, who works with Michael. Michael kind of directed the scene here, but you can see the oil workers coming up to this craft, and just like that.
Yeah. So this is where we were talking about that discrepancy. But Scott Ramsey actually did interview one of these oil workers.
Yes, the
About-
last surviving one.
Yeah, about their account. So,
Right.
There you go. So,
Now, what they saw inside there, I've got 2 different drawings from years apart. I'll just show them. This is from Steinman's book, actually. This has not been seen very much. This is William Steinman. This is his book in the mid-1980s. Had an artist named Chan Johnson do a variety of illustrations for the book, and there's certain differences. So here's Vannevar Bush looking through the window in his version, and the other power scientists looking through, and they use a kind of sharpened branch or piece of wood
actually,
that poked through
well,
in their version.
in the other story,
Right.
where it's the oil workers, apparently they got up on the craft. They're looking around. They find this hole in one of the portholes. There were 6 of these portholes
There it
on
is.
the upper dome.
Yeah.
They were super mirrored and glassy, according to that witness.
Right.
And they went back to their truck, and they got something from the truck, this pole, and stuck it through, and they were just sort of jamming it around. Now,
Right.
by the way, these guys were 18, 19 years old at the time. So they were more curious, they weren't scared.
Yeah.
They were just curious, right? So they're poking around and trying to figure it out. When they stick that through the hole, they inadvertently apparently there was an opening.
They activated a hatch.
They did.
That was below. Yeah.
So they were able to go
get
in and check it out.
And then what they saw were the dead aliens. So this is, let me just share
again,
this one.
you said that this is Michael Strat actually directing the artist.
Tom Bogan, yes,
right,
to do this. And let me just do another close up. So it's actually, I mean, pretty consistent with what you got with Steinman. In fact, going all the way back to Scully in 1950, this is a very consistent story. There, and the indecipherable script, this is a nice illustration of it. I remember asking Michael about these letters. I said, how accurate is this? And Michael had talked directly with Scott Ramsey about this. And he said, look, as far as Scott is concerned, like this is as accurate as, like this is what he got.
Yeah. And I remember you specifically asked about the shadows because it looks like they're hovering off the wall.
Right.
And they said that is correct.
That's how it was. So, and this is all Scott Ramsey, who spoke to the last surviving oil worker, like the guy who was there. And so this is what he's being told, and looking in and seeing the dead, charred alien and so on. So that's what you got. So you want to keep going? You're on a roll here.
Well, let's go. Yeah, let's go to the next spot. One thing. Well, before we do that, so I think we gave most of the information about the craft, but I always love all the details. So the craft was, just under 100 feet wide, right? It was super wide. It was only about 6 feet tall. Was it 6 feet or 12 feet? No,
I thought it was 12 or 13 feet.
Oh, maybe it was 12.
Yeah,
okay, I've been looking at other crashes as well.
Right.
Okay, 12 feet tall.
It's still kind of a low,
super slender and super long.
Right.
So they said it was sort of a very luminous aluminum. There were no seams.
Ultra shiny, ultra reflective.
Ultra shiny. Yeah, there were no seams on it. There was no method of propulsion. Again, they had these 6 little portholes. That was it.
Right.
So that's all about the craft
that
I think there is. But I just think it's always important for us to get those details. So when we listen to other accounts, we can sort of compare,
One thing that's worth mentioning before we get into the rest of the bodies and the priest, or the minister, not really a priest, is the fact that one thing Scott Ramsey found was a huge slab. And the dimensions here, yes. So it's a little over 3 feet by 3 feet. So 39 inches by 39 inches by 9 inches high. And it's concrete, it's a footer.
Yeah.
And this was used during the recovery. Now, I remember when I talked with Michael about this, he emphasized, like, you really have to have 2 of these to have the extrication of the craft, because these would go with the M25 tank transporter that you'd require this as a footing to be able to pull these things out. And Michael was funny. He said, look, all you have to do is just go 8 feet apart from it and dig, a couple of inches down, and you very well might find that other footer. And if you did, he says, it's a done deal, Richard. It's a done deal. So I don't know why that hasn't been done, why, if there's a reason for that or not. But that is very tantalizing. But anyway, Scott did find one of these, and it's the perfect type of footer for this type of an excavation.
And it's so odd in the first place that it was up there at the top of this little mesa, where they're saying there's this road that has no reason to be there. It has nowhere to go.
Right.
But it's there.
Right.
And same with this slab. Like, why would it be there? Yeah. So...
do you want to talk about the minister? I can show this next image here.
Let's look at this.
And then we are going to try to wrap it up in 10 minutes. Let's see. Can we do that?
I know, because Skinwalker's on tonight. Right?
Yeah, so we're going to wrap it up.
People probably want to see that.
So this is another illustration by Tom Bogan. Just want to point out, again, this is his work, and under the direction of Michael Strat. And I think Scott Ramsey as well, I imagine. But you can see they go to another area and they find 14 more bodies.
That's right. So there were allegedly 2 in the top level dome in sort of the control area.
Right.
And then in the next level down, this is where they found all of these beings.
And you got the army here, you can see.
Yeah, you've got the army.
You got local law enforcement.
Apparently there was, there was the minister, the Baptist minister.
He's right here.
A congressman. There were at least 2 firefighters and 2 police officers.
Right.
And then there's the military. But yeah, I think one of the most significant things that you and Michael talked about was that with this case was that civilians arrived first.
Right.
And so all of those ones that I was talking about in the beginning, where you had the 2 policemen, you had the rancher, and you had the oil workers, these are the people who all ended up there.
And it's not surprising that you get civilians getting there first in 1948 in this remote region. You know, there's a small town, there's people living there. They're a lot closer than the military. And the military very well may have triangulated this, but it doesn't mean that they're going to get there before the people who are right there on the spot.
Yeah. So the military arrived there, and apparently they told the minister, you know, you're never to say anything about this. This is a matter of the highest level of national security. Right. You can't speak about this until you die.
And he's performing last rites.
Yes.
You should say, like you can see right here, this is what his purpose was apparently.
Right. But
he didn't do that. He actually did. He blabbed to his entire parish.
Well, no, it wasn't like, well,
it was
here
sort
I am
of like
defending
that.
him like as if I know him. But no, he
was excited.
Well, I think he was excited. I think he was also a little bit scared and a little bit probably in shock, because what he did do is he went down and he told the deacon from his church and his 11-year-old son. And apparently he never told anybody else, including his own son.
I thought I was, to understand, we'll have to get this cleared up from Scott and Suzanne.
Yeah.
That he told his parish, he told his congregation, like, you're never going to believe what I saw.
I think in some accounts it said the minister and parishioner, the deacon and parishioner, as in the one person.
All right. Well, maybe that's
we'll see. But this will be an interesting thing to ask Scott.
Well, Scott, I know, at least I think, spoke to the last surviving member of that congregation. So somehow that came to Scott Ramsey through not the minister, who I'm sure was dead by then, but through one of the members of the congregation. Scott
was actually able to interview firsthand the deacon's son that I just mentioned, who was 11 years old at the time. And when Scott and Suzanne. Yeah. And so when they spoke to him, he said, oh, yes, I remember. I was there because it was the first time I had ever seen a grown man cry.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And it was super powerful for him. It really affected him. So, you know, he validated what happened. But Scott and Suzanne went way beyond that. You know, they were looking for proof that he was involved in that minister was involved in that church. They were looking for proof of where he lived. They were looking for, you know, they really dug around into all the details. So it'd be great. But they also were able to directly talk to that minister's son when he was 86 years old, mind you. And apparently he had never told this to his son. So he had told his deacon, but the son said, if my father said that, or if the Sayers, if the deacon and his son said that, my father said that, you can take it as fact.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
then he got him just before at the wire, you know, 86 years old.
Yeah.
Not many more years you've got.
Yeah. And apparently his father, the minister, did talk to him, his son, about Roswell, because the son was interested in UFOs because of that, but he had never mentioned this case.
Fascinating.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that's really what we've got for this. Anything else you wanted to add to wrap this up? I mean, we're going to try to get Scott and Suzanne on here.
It's going to be better hearing it directly from them. Anyhow.
They'll do a better job.
I just want to say, a couple things that I just want to mention. You know, if anyone wants to go ahead and dig into the story and dig into their book, there is an audiobook version for those of you who like audiobooks
of the Ramseys book.
Yeah, the first edition, at least, there is an audiobook. And there's a great chapter, I think it's chapter 9, that talks about Scott and Suzanne got an expert to come and find out if it was actually true that an object that was so wide could be taken down from the top of that.
Oh, well, we didn't even get into how that was taken down.
Right, on that skinny road, because it actually disassembled. I mean, this is the part
that I've actually had a hard time with. I'm honestly going to say,
Okay.
like, this seems like a real reach for me, but this is
because it was 100 feet wide, 100 feet in diameter.
well, what you get with the account is that somehow after the military got hold of this craft, they were fiddling with.
I know this part is hard to believe. I agree
the craft separated into like three pie pieces, as it were, with a central core.
Yeah.
And so suddenly it's in 4 pieces, and that's how they bring the M25 tank transporters, which each took one of those segments. They wrapped it under a tarp and chained it down and all of that.
Said it was explosives.
And marked it as explosives. And I don't think they were able to completely cover it with the tarp, but mostly. And that's like a matter of amazing luck, right? According to what Scott and Suzanne were researching, the craft wasn't taken to Muroc Air Base, Edwards, but it was taken to Los Alamos, where they studied it and tried to re-engineer, maybe tried to put it back together.
But they knew that one of the biggest problems with this case was that a lot of people wouldn't believe that something so huge could make it down the mesa and make it that far. So that's something
with those roads.
So that's something that they really knew that they were going to have to prove. And so they brought in an expert, and they did all sorts of measurements. They did aerial photos. This guy was an expert in moving large objects.
Right.
And he writes in their book, it's either chapter 9 or chapter 11, his whole detailed analysis is in there
as to how it really would have been feasible.
That it absolutely could happen.
Yeah.
And also, just out of interest, he was a total skeptic. So he said, if there was, if this could have been done. So that was a big deal to the case. And there is so much more.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating case.
But it will be great to have them tell the story.
We will endeavor. I'll look for them.
Yeah.
I think we should wrap it up. We've been going for almost an hour. Sorry about the break in the middle, but I'm glad we're able to get it back. Don't know why that happened. It's the conspiracy. That's spelled C-O-N.
Here we go.
Spiracy. That's how you spell conspiracy. You remember that? That was Damon Wayans on In Living Color. That was like one of his things.
I don't remember that.
That's dating me.
I used to watch In Living Color.
A long time ago.
I don't remember that. I remember a lot of other
amazing.
skits that I liked, but not that one.
Anyway, glad we got back after our glitch, and here we are, and working through the Corona times together. Glad to be here with you.
Thought this might be a nice diversion. There's times where we think it seems so weird to be talking about UFOs at a time like this, but then on the other hand, it's a nice break from this, and we're all sitting in our homes together, and why not hang out together?
But let's just keep one thing in mind. Like, I'm going to bring it back to the importance. It is a diversion from what we're dealing with, but it's very important. Like this, the whole phenomenon of UFO crash retrievals, like, let us not forget the central critical importance of this phenomenon. All right. In an era now where UFOs are becoming a little easier for people to talk about in public.
Yeah.
We're at this like first grade level of, well, we don't know what they are. Maybe they're Russian, maybe they're Chinese, maybe they're from another world. It's like, guess what? We've been there, done that so long ago. The United States military, and guaranteed the Russian military, and almost certainly the Chinese and other militaries, they've got their own. They've recovered their own. And it is understandable on the one hand why people would be dancing around, because this is an explosive topic, but it's also, to those of us who've looked into it, it's a little bit insulting. It's like, we know these objects have come down and they have been studied. It's a lot more than we don't know what they are. So I'll just leave it at that. And I think getting into the UFO phenomenon deeply on that level is important. Can you just show me Stringfield's book at the bottom?
And they speak to the cover-up component, which.
So we're going to get back into this here. This is the collection of Leonard Stringfield's various investigation status reports, all of them. It's absolutely important. It doesn't exist as an ebook, unfortunately. And it was tough to get even as a printed book, but it's got them all together and absolutely worthwhile. I want to data mine that for more information for these.
2 more things I just want to say really quickly.
Yeah.
When we do talk to Scott and Suzanne, we definitely want to talk to them about their research they did on the newspapers at the time.
Good.
Because they went and found out that there were some interesting things there.
Yeah.
Confirming that they were alerting the town they were going to be using the roads and moving some very heavy.
Oh, interesting confirmation there.
Yes.
Right. Very good.
So it'd be really cool if he talked about that. And not only that, they were also getting people to board men who were coming in to work on this project, this big project.
Interesting indeed.
So, and then the other thing that we can't forget to talk about.
Yes.
I keep going, is the 1950 Farmington Armada.
Oh, I would love to. You know who's actually more expert in it than anyone is David Marler.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he actually has done some deep research. He gave a deep lecture on it. But it's a fascinating event. And that was 1950, the spring, and Farmington's very close by, very close to all of this. They saw for several days in March of 1950 an armada of what appeared to be hundreds of these objects going across the sky.
Yeah, I've always thought of Phoenix Lights as one of the most overt sightings. But then it seems to me this is potentially
it's fascinating.
The most overt sighting ever seen by such large groups.
We can do a dive into that, and maybe we can bring David in for that.
Really
he knows it extremely well.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
So Skinwalker's on tonight.
Yeah, we got to let these people go.
I know.
They got to do their thing.
I know.
Very, very fun having you here. Sorry about the glitch. We're glad to be back, and we're happy to be here despite the lockdown. And thank you for everyone's support, both in being here, hitting that like button, smash the like button. Chat family, our forum family on our site is very, very important. Members of our site.
Say hi to you all and thank you all so much.
All of you guys are amazing.
To all the regulars who show up here on YouTube, to all the new people, hello, welcome. And we will be doing this live every second week.
Right.
And we have the new Richard Dolan short clips.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We rolled one out last Saturday, put a little bit of a light music soundtrack to the background. I think it sounds great. That one was David Jacobs and me, but we've got a couple of other really good ones coming up. We're rolling out a whole bunch.
Yeah.
I'm actually really happy about that.
Yeah, I am too. So if you haven't subscribed, we will be releasing those somewhat randomly. So you can subscribe to this YouTube channel for free. It's a great way to support and turn on notifications, and you will see whenever we drop one of these new shorts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. That's it.
I know.
Good night. Stay safe.
Yes.
Use your brain power and not making things worse. Let's get this thing done ASAP so we can all get back to our lives. How about that? All right. We all want to do that.
Thinking of you all. Have a great night. Thanks for joining us.
Later, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.